As COVID-19 continues to make its presence felt across the world, there's no doubt that it's had a huge impact on global relations, especially if we look at the relationship between the United States and China, where trade issues, brinkmanship and the particular dispositions of President Xi and President Trump meant the relationship was already tense. COVID-19 and the blame game has elevated that, with some experts saying the superpowers are entering into Cold War territory. For more on this, we're joined by foreign policy expert, Otago University professor and always welcome breakfast guest, Robert Patman. Morena, Professor Patman, how are you?
Morena, John. I'm fine, thank you.
Yeah, good. I was reading this, I want to talk about China and the US, but I was reading this absolutely fascinating thing you wrote for Spin-Off, and I really recommend that people read it. And you talk about the COVID-19 crisis confirming the near breakdown of an international rules-based order that New Zealand had almost taken for granted. In other words, the people and institutions that normally put things right can't. So what the hell is happening?
Well, I think what we've seen, John, is that two of the traditional architects of the rules-based order, as we know it, the UK and the United States, have both got populist governments at the moment, have moved away from sort of multilateral diplomacy and some of the norms that go with it. In the UK, you've had a government withdraw the United Kingdom from the EU, a multilateral organisation based on international cooperation, the pooling of sovereignty. And in the United States, we've had the Trump administration, which has basically rubbished multilateralism, prefers bilateralism, and has been very lukewarm about international institutions, criticising the UN, the WTO, NATO.
The World Health Organization, yeah.
Yeah, in a sense, the landscape has been changing for a while. And I think what comes out of COVID-19 is that neither China nor the United States have performed particularly well. They haven't rallied the international community to deal with what's a global problem. This, COVID-19 doesn't recognise borders. Instead, we have the two superpowers trading insults over a problem they can't control.
OK, let's talk about that. And then I want to come to the new order. But if we look at President Xi and President Trump, they revel in slagging each other off. But also there is, they need each other at some level. Are we heading towards a Cold War? That seems to me, both of these guys are egoists. Both of them are determined, they're solipsistic, they're determined to have things their own way, but they're also pragmatists too, aren't they, Robert?
Yes, I think, first of all, I think with respect to whether we're going back to a Cold War, I don't think that's the case. I don't think we can rerun history. The world is completely different in the 21st century than it was when the Cold War was on, 1989 and before. And the other thing is that the world is increasingly confronted by problems which do not respect boundaries. If you think about the economy, the security area, we've seen COVID-19, but we've also got a much bigger problem looming in the background, climate change, which doesn't respect borders. So in a sense, we've got two great powers which are assuming they can run the world if only the other would listen, but they can't. And so in a sense, one of the sobering trends, for at least for great powers, of the post-Cold War period has been the unsuccessful track record of unilateral action, whether it be the Americans in Iraq, the Chinese in the South China Seas, or the Russians in the Ukraine. None of it's been swimming, none of these have been swimming successes, no. Which points to the need, I think, for greater international cooperation on problems that none of us can control individually or going alone.
So then that brings us to the great New Zealand question here at the bottom of the world, and that is, what about us? And I want to quote to you from your Spin-Off article: "A global pandemic is a good time for New Zealand to reset its foreign policy. By clearly rejecting the politics of populism, isolationism and protectionism, Wellington should actively champion an international rules-based order as the most realistic approach to global challenges that do not respect borders." What would an international rules-based order look like now, Robert? Where the hell would it come from?
I think the essential elements are there. It's easy to say, well, what could New Zealand, a relatively small country, do? Of course, it wouldn't do. I wasn't suggesting we act unilaterally and we lead the charge. What I'm suggesting is there's plenty of other countries. New Zealand, a small country, along with many other middle powers, have a huge interest in a rules-based system. Rules are there for the weaker, not the strong. And so the majority of countries, and I'm talking here about 187 out of about 193 in the UN, actively like rules because they give them a voice and an influence they wouldn't otherwise have. If it was all decided by raw power, then the great powers would be having disproportionate influence, and that's not good for the majority. So what I'm saying here is that I think New Zealand has to get out of the habit of waiting for the United States or the UK or some other bigger player to lead a multilateral initiative. I think we have to start taking the initiative. After the Christchurch terror atrocity and after, well, we're not out of COVID-19 yet, but when we emerge from that, and indeed during it, I think we have the opportunity. I think New Zealand's international position has been enhanced. There's lots of other countries which want to see the rules-based system reinforced. But I think we can't just defend the status quo, John. I think we actually have to deepen it and make a much more rational approach to global politics.
I can't. I've got the rap from Shiga, and I so want to hear how we do that and what happens next. So we might do this as a series of interviews, Robert, because it's such a good point. And if we look at the power of veto that the big nations have on the UN Security Council, so you've raised so many things. So I think we might just get you back. But thing is, and I really, actually, anyone who's interested, who's listening to Robert and thinking, "Gosh, he sounds fascinating. This is really interesting," do read his article on the spin-off. A new geopolitics will emerge from COVID-19, and New Zealand can be at its forefront. We so appreciate you raising these ideas, Robert. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, lovely to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.